essentially what Saima and I are going to do is to talk about the book, or at least we're going to base what we want to say around what we said in the book. It's a book about stories, and I've got to just begin with a little story, because there was a point when Saima and I were writing about intersectionality and looking at the ways in which that operated within science education. And we submitted a paper to a journal that was refused. It was rejected. How dare they? And the reason that they rejected it was that we had personalized intersectionality in terms of the stories of young women. It so happens in schools. And the argument from the reviewers was that intersectionality is a sociological theory that has very broad implications, and it's talking about very large sections of society and the impact of sociological issues on people in society. And we'd driven it down to the personal, and they weren't happy with this. So what we began to do is to think about, hang on a sec, wait a minute, are there other people who like to drive down sociological theory into the individual, at the level of the individual? And of course, we found some support for that and began to write rather more about intersectionality in terms of people, and rather than in terms of publics, for example. So that was the starting point, really, for the kind of, with our grumbling at this particular journal's reviewers. And we began to sort of explore that in rather more detail. Hence the book, it's stories. And we came to success rather than failure, if that's the right opposition to it, because there is a lot written about the barriers, the hindrances, the difficulties, the challenges for essentially young women, for all students, by the way, but principally about young women and different kinds of groups of young women. So that began to the push for the stories in the book. So there's the starting point there, the notion of intersectionality, large and small. It took us a little while to begin to sort of construct that argument, really, that we could look at individuals' lives in terms of the major social forces that operate on people, whether it's socioeconomic, whether it's cultural, whether it's heritage, whether it's gender, social class, whatever it happens to be, age to some extent as well. And by the way, we've just become increasingly interested in age as a factor in all of this. So that what we were doing essentially was driving the broad sociological theory of intersectionality down, not quite to the psychological, but certainly to the personal level. And as it says there, we were rather averse to the idea of it just being about blocks and hindrances. We recognize those. Come on, I mean, we understand that. I am, from a long time ago, I was a physics teacher, a secondary school physics teacher. So I know all about the loathing that is associated in young people's minds with the teaching of physics. I rather hope it's not all down to me, but, and it may well have been some. But the idea that you're trying to persuade young people at the age of 13 to enter into GCSE level physics or A level physics, and the groans of distaste you get live with you. So, but rather than focus on that, you'll see as we go along that we wanted to sort of look at the positives rather than the negatives. One of the things that we began to look at is the idea of the pipeline. We felt, actually, we sort of fell out with the idea of the pipeline. The pipeline is something that is suggested that means that young people are fed into one end of the pipeline. They go through a process of study and formal study in the sciences, emerge out at the other end. There's seldom enough of them, and the cry out from industry and technology is, generally speaking, and commerce to that extent, that there is a dearth of young people coming through the pipeline. One of the suggestions within policy and politics is that you stuff more kids in at the beginning so that you get enough kids coming out to the end of it. And of course, part of what we're talking about is that they don't particularly want to do that. Young people are averse to necessarily being fed into the beginning of the pipeline. We didn't like the metaphor. And so what we began to do was to think, actually, no, this isn't appropriate. It isn't just a straightforward process. People leak out of the pipeline at all sorts of levels. Then A, they never enter it, or B, at 13, they don't want to do it. At 15 or 16, they don't want to do it. At 18, they go. And even those people who emerge through graduate study may go off and join Barclays Bank or NatWest or somebody, rather than necessarily going to a STEM occupation. So we weren't terribly enamored of the idea of the pipeline. But more than that, we could see instances where people were joining the pipeline at a later stage. That's something that has stuck with us. And when I said a moment ago that we were sort of interested in an age profile, one of the things that we are coming to talk about is, slowly coming to talk about, is that people join the pipeline at different stages, whether it's at an informal level in the sense that they become interested in the environment, the climate change, they become an activist against something that's happening in their locality. Somebody's building a chemical factory at the bottom of the garden, or whatever it happens to be. There's a range of different ways in which people begin to enter into science, even though it wasn't part of their early thinking in their formative years, if you like. So people do come into, so we fell out with this idea of the pipeline and began to think of other kinds of ways in which we could talk about that metaphor. For example, a major motorway wherein people flow in and flow out of it in all sorts of different directions and curves and corners and so on. We weren't terribly enamored of something like a ladder of success either. You know, the sort of snakes and ladders game where young people would go up some, slip off and fall down, and come down the snake, go up the ladder. And we understood success in slightly different ways than just simply that of academic success. Success is, you know, 6 GCSEs or 3 A levels or whatever it happens to be. Again, it felt that kind of formalized assessment system through schooling wasn't quite where we wanted to go to. So in the stories that we talk about, success is a range. I mean, I guess it's true for all of you as you are listening now and thinking about it. Your own successes in life could be anything, you know, from your hobbies, your leisure activities, your sporting activities, even getting your kids to do what you say you want them to do, which is a major struggle in my household, I'll tell you. But it's success is very varied, it's multi-leveled, it's nuanced, it's complex. It's not something that is simply, oh, I have achieved this, I have achieved that, let me, you know, walk up a ladder here. We then began to think about the way in which we wanted to talk about culture as well, not least of all because of intersectionality and the role that culture has to play in all of that. So we began to think of it, and there's a lovely, I'm sorry, Simon, I'm going to forget the name. It's Anne Wilson.
Anne Phillips.
Anne Phillips, thank you very much indeed. Anne Phillips, who talks about wearing your culture. And it struck us both as a very nice sort of way of talking about the nature of culture. So I'm from Wales, I'm North Walian, and at times I'm ferociously Welsh, particularly when Wales are playing rugby. Or when I'm actually back at home, I just feel incredibly Welsh. When I'm in Europe, I'm no longer quite so Welsh. I'm European. I don't like, not keen on being a Brit abroad, although that is essentially what I am. And this wearing of culture seemed to us to be something that we can adopt and adapt. And it's quite patently clear in the stories that we were rehashing and taking and retelling, that people also, on occasions, people would wear custom, you know, their cultural clothing, their heritage clothing, and other times they wouldn't, and they can choose and move around. And so this idea of wearing it lightly, wearing it heavily, began to sort of shape how we talked about the role of culture in the stories that we're talking about.
So as Mike was talking about stories, we gathered around 62, 63 stories in around 3 years' time. So we started off in 2019 and we kept on collecting until 2022. And these women are multi-age South Asian women. They're all British, Scottish as well. And it includes mainly schoolgirls, university students, professionals, and mothers as well. But one way or other, they were all involved in STEM education. We used McCall's intersectional complexity. One of it is intra-categorical. So for our sample selection, as you can see, is more of South Asian women in Britain with STEM backgrounds. Uh, this was sample correction, but when we were analyzing our data, we realized that the women who we are talking to, they are not only talking about their family, their South Asian culture, but they were also talking about their colleagues who are from different cultural backgrounds or from different ethnic backgrounds. So we see it that we used both intra and intercategorical complexity. Narratives is one of our favorites, so we used a narrative inquiry, and it was very much a necessity for the intersectional research as well. We call them science lives, as lived experience as science lives, where we collected stories of successes in science. So as Mike mentioned, one of our main focus was success rather than barriers, oppression, and hindrances. It's not that we didn't collect that and we didn't portray it in the book, we did, but at the same time, we tried to collect more and more success stories. In doing that, we did semi-structured interviews, and which actually becomes conversational interviews. We hardly had one or two questions. It was mainly their life, their STEM life, and then from their STEM life, we used to probe questions. Now, in this probing process, we started off with three main social factors, categories: ethnicity, gender, and religion. However, we were never restricted to any fixed choices. So as Mike was mentioning, that age was one of the factors that came out from all the 62, 63 studies. Not everyone was talking about it. But one particular example is Amna, and she had 5 years career break. And when she came back to work as a doctor, she had to start again as a junior doctor. For first 15, 20 minutes of her interview, she kept on talking about age. The age was rooted in all her conversation for so long. So again, it's not only that we are focusing on race or ethnicity, whatever our participants think that they are rooted, their narratives were rooted, we worked on that. Then we used a hybrid space while we were analyzing. The first one is the first person, which is the interpretation of our participants themselves. And the second one is our other or third person account, that's us. So how we presented our third person account were in the form of short snapshots of each participants. Again, these interpretations were our interpretations of their lives. So we sent these interpretations back to our participants for member checking. Now, with this intersectional sort of research, we think that there are various limitations, but two of them are very much highlighted in the literature as well. One is our positionality, and the other one is trustworthiness of the intersectional data. So I also identify myself as South Asian female, British. So my intersections were could be very much similar to our participants. And Mike has worked with so many colleagues who are South Asian women, and he has taught and supervised maybe millions of South Asian female students in the UK context. So we do have a research bias involved. And again, and the second one, trustworthiness of intersectional data. I will show you, and we will show you some examples of these intersections later on. And you can see in just one sentence, there are 4 to 5 intersections. And of course, we can miss that as researchers. So what we did, there were 2 things we did. First is that we collected the data separately, the interview separately, and tried to analyze the data separately as well, and then came together. Second, we also had a critical friend at the start of the study, and she's from Asian background, and she looked at some of the transcripts and some of our analysis as well. And as I mentioned, we did member checking with the participants themselves as well. So today, the two key highlights of the book we are going to share, then other culture and other highlights as well. But today we are only going to talk about success in science, and the other one is pedagogy for success. So as Mike was mentioning, there's accordingly, we see a linear path of success. We have educational degree of GCSE, A levels, profession, promotion, professions, so on. Yes, that's absolutely correct. However, our participants were mainly talking about 5 main success themes. One of it is contentment and happiness, going against the tide, empowered by altruistic, being involved in the process, and continuing with informal learning of science. And I'm going to talk each of these themes with examples. Now, this is one of the projects that we presented in the book, and it involves 28 women participants. Again, some of them are schoolgirls, some of them are from university, some are professionals. And one of them is a mother as well. Right, so the first one is contentment and happiness. So you can see there's a lot of text on the slide. It's just to keep the narrative style intact. I'm not going to read all of it, but what we have done is that we have underlined the intersections. So you can see nationality, South Asian ethnicity, gender, and so on. And whereas the blue highlighted text relates back to the themes. So starting off with Lubna. Lubna is, at the time of the interview, she was completing her PGDE in a Scottish university. And she thinks that she's in a very fortunate position as a Scottish person because Scotland supports ethnic diversity. She talks about South Asian girls who are back home in India, Pakistan, and other South Asian countries, because she for her success is having education as compared to the girls who are back home. And she also mentioned that she feels that she's very much privileged. So a very different narrative, a very different success kind of narrative was shared by Lubna. Hania is, at the time of the interview, she was completing her GCSEs. And a success for her is that, again, she has more opportunities over here in England. And she wants to prove that she can be productive and successful as a British Pakistani Muslim woman. At the same time, she mentioned that her parents were immigrants from Pakistan. And as they were immigrants, they didn't have all this opportunity, but she does. So all of this contentment and happiness were coming throughout the conversation. You can see again, as we were mentioning, that there's a lot, four actually intersections already there in terms of gender, religion, heritage, and nationality. The second theme is going against the tide, and sometimes some of the women were talking about going above the tide as well. So CERII, she currently a lab technician in a London school, in a secondary London school. And at the time of the interview, she met her husband and they got married. But he immigrated from Sri Lanka. And she was saying that that her husband really influenced her career decisions. And she's like, no, that's my decision and I should be taking it. And you can see the intersection of age here, that she was saying, oh, if I'll be living 70 or 80 years, I should be happy and this should be my decision. Lee, on the other hand, she finished a postdoc in chemistry at that time, and she was working in a school. She's from mixed background, and her story was a was quite different from the others in a way that she kept on talking about her mom and her mom's family. So her mom is from a South Asian background, dad from a white British background. But then after some time, they separated when she was actually very young. And throughout the time, she lived with her mom and her mom's family. And the whole idea in her mom's family was that they have done an incorrect decision, and this is the reason they're not living a successful life, according to her mom's family. So I'm just going to read very quickly this, the blue bit. And I wanted to show my mom's family and everybody that because I'm mixed race, or my mom, in their opinion, has made incorrect decisions in life, doesn't mean I'm going to be less prosperous than others. Therefore, I'm just skipping a line. Therefore, I'm the only PhD in science in the entire family. Next theme is empowered by altruistics. Arib, for example, a primary school student just finishing a primary school. She was talking about her dad and her science teacher, who's from South Asian background. And again, they were talking about back home, there are issues in small towns. They don't have a heart specialist, and she wants to become a heart specialist, and she wants to open a hospital back home so that she can help them. Archel from Scotland, Glasgow mainly. And what she was talking about was during her undergrad studies, she's an engineer by profession. So during her undergrad studies, they did an outreach program. And the outreach program was to help the people of Glasgow. And that actually led her to take this outreach program as part of her working life. And all she wanted to do is to help the pollution in Glasgow. Glasgow is one of the most polluted cities in the UK. Being involved in the process, the majority talked about it, that success is not just one-off. There are micro successes and micro failures in life. Anshul, again, she talks about, she had some gender bias in the engineering industry. Sadly, because of that, she left the engineering industry, the on-site industry, but now she's working off-site. But what she says is that there are a number of failures, and that has probably led her to achieve later on in life. Salma, on the other hand, also talked about accumulative and multicolored indicators. And again, there are micro success and failures in life. The last one is continuing with the informal learning of science. Salma is the PhD person, and she's working in education sector. She's informal learning of science, as Mike was mentioning, was very much inclined in everyone's life. Even, yes, they were all STEM specialists in one way or other. Still, how they keep up with informal learning of sciences through watching Doctor Who programs, National Geographic, Infinity, A Monkey Cage, and so on. Whereas Zainab she talks about as a mother, how she engaged with informal learning of science at home. Once her daughter asked her, are there more wheels or more doors in the world on a dining table? And then the discussion started. So yeah, these were the 5 main themes on success. Moving on to pedagogy for success.
We're educators, and so at the end of the day, we're interested in the so what of the stories for the processes of science education, and what can we learn from what the stories say in order to carry it forward. And the idea was that we were talking about a pedagogy for, not of. The preposition is important. If you have a pedagogy of success, the implication is that what you're doing is striving for the sorts of academic measurements that we were talking about before. We were more interested in setting the platform, creating the basis, laying the groundwork for success rather than trying to measure it in some respects. So what you're going to get next is what does that platform look like? The diagram is one that came from Sophia Luo, and she really just set out what she thought was the 6 main features of education or learning in her case. And she's talking there, as you can see, about the nature of informal learning and formalized learning, the difference between schools, if you like, and what happens in everyday life. And I like the idea of incidental learning. It's that learning you do when you were thinking about something else, you know. And somebody recently was talking about how does a touch screen work? And during the course of talking about how a touch screen works, they became aware of the fact that there are 2 different kinds of, generally 2 different kind of models of touch screen. You can have a resistive one or a condenser one, and the idea and it wasn't what they set out to do, but it became the kind of ways in which they begin to do some learning on the incidentally. We all know about formal learning. That's our business, that's our jobs, generally speaking. And the idea of purposive rather than incidental, where you set out to do something, where you set out to understand touchscreens or whatever. So the sense being that what we weren't interested in particular was pedagogies of success, because that implies a fixed sense of what success is. And so we wanted to lay the groundwork before that. So we did. These are not specifically ours. Our contribution here was to pull them together into these 5 areas that we thought were important. Other people have written about this before us. As I said, our contribution was to try and sort of elaborate these, A, as a 5, as a quintet, and B, as indicators of success. Whenever we were talking to people, it became clear that the people around them, their web of relations, whether it's family, and family was very important for a large number of the stories that we're talking about, whether it's family or professional colleagues or home friends and so on. That web of relations was really a vital part of the way that they learned. I mean, there are so many stories that it's hard to choose one in particular, but somebody was very interested in the onset of diabetes, late onset diabetes. And so part of what she was worried about was the extent to which that might impact her or her family. But her next door neighbor is a nurse, so part of the conversations took place over the garden fence, or she got engaged with a range of other people in order to be able to sort of help her understand her learning. And her success was really measured in terms of the range of people that she could turn to for support and learning about the different things, whether it's her GP or whatever it happened to be. And that, if you carry that into a rather more formalized situation, you know that certainly at university level, that sense of relationship that you have, A, with students and students have with themselves, between themselves, is a really important ingredient in how we manage teaching, learning, and higher education, what their success would be. Learning objectives is palpable. I mean, do I really need to talk about that in particular? But again, it came through the stories. Somebody who would feel that they needed to get to grips with something and set themselves little goals and objectives. Some of it was incidental. So, for example, if you're watching David Attenborough's Blue Planet or something of that nature, you're learning all the time that you're doing that. You might just be sitting watching TV, but it so happens to be educational TV and you're watching that. But that carried over for some people into a kind of concern for plastic pollution and the ways in which they might begin to change their own lives in terms of the amount of plastic use they have, the gradation and the recycling of plastics and so on. So we had stories there about how families would begin to take note of and begin to think about and take concern for and feel successful having learned something about the chemistry of plastics. The flow of knowledge is something that's really interesting because, of course, when you get to families, and we have a particular sort of, not only just an interest in age in terms of the intersectionality of this. But the cultural heritage that comes through families is really interesting. And the extent to which the kids learn from the parents and the parents from the kids was that up and down and sideways. You know, how do kids learn from each other? That sideways transmission that goes on all of the time. And the flow of knowledge in formal situations we all know about. You know, come on, I'm a professor, I professor, therefore you should, and so on. But it isn't exactly like that. And certainly in the worlds of the stories we're talking about, that flow of knowledge wasn't just from my wise father down to the daughter. No, good grief. Dad was learning just as much from daughter as daughter was from dad. And it just seems to me that we don't, I don't think we pay enough attention to the ways in which success brews from that kind of mixed flow enterprise that goes on within groups, families in particular. The experiential texture, again, you know, we know it implicitly that as you set, I've called it later the evaluative tone, but you could call it the experiential tone, how you set out what you feel is the what you want the experience to be, what you want the experience to be like, is going to engender success. And my my next door neighbor who I talked to, she's actually enrolled in a course at Brunel, nothing to do with me, by the way. She's an occupational therapist, and it's a different department altogether. Go, you know, but she was talking about the ways in which people work in the department and the kind of sense that you get of the camaraderie, the colleagueship, the exchanges that go on within the department and how that all works. And it just brings home to me on occasions that sense of texture. What does it feel like? What are the experiences like? And a lot of that came through in the stories as people would talk about just the success of the enterprise itself and the feelings that they got from it. And the evaluative tone, I mean, who's evaluating who? You know, whose job is it to do the evaluation of that success and that learning that goes on? And the autonomy that's attached to any form of adult learning is something we all know about. But in this case, it was taking charge of their own evaluation. They wanted accreditation, of course they did. They wanted approbation, of course they do. They want all of the kind of stuff that we would ordinarily get from any kind of form of pedagogy, but they also wanted to take some sense of that themselves, about how they could. Of course they do. You know, I mean, let's face it. You know, there's a sort of mini TripAdvisor thing going on in everybody's head, isn't there? About is this worthwhile? You know, is this what I want to do? Do I care? You know, what's happening here? And I think that capacity to take charge of their own sense of evaluation all the way through was a marker of success. Our sense is that if we can get those 5 things right, then you lay the groundwork for informal, sometimes incidental, often purposive, sometimes formalized forms of learning that go on. So as you can see there, that Salehjee is talking about the family, and both of these are about families, as you can see. The sense of expectation of families about where you're going to go and what you might want to do. I was always going to be a doctor or a teacher. I chose to be an engineer, and they're okay with that. You know, this is a sort of throwaway line at the end there, but they're okay with me being an engineer. I don't know about your families, but certainly in mine, we were all teachers, and there was a fairly strong expectation that we'd all be teachers. I mean, there's a big bunch of us. Again, you know, the idea of we came across a kind of pecking order, didn't we, Simon? Of if you can't be a doctor, then have you thought about being a vet? If you're not be a vet, can you be a dentist? If you can't be a dentist, can you be an optician or a pharmacist or something? And there was a sort of a whole array of different sort of forms of science-based careers and professions that families had in their heads as to how their young should be professionalized within sciences. As Amna says, you know, when I started working, he said, have you started working? It seems to me you have. So I was like, oh, how did you find out that? And he said, because you look very happy, you know. So it was coming out of a family of doctors, and you know, obviously a sign of success was that she was actually back in employment and working. Learning objectives. One of the things when we were talking about the methodology attached to all of this, and Simon and I came up with an expression called autobiography or biography, rather than, you know, being biographic, because graphic implies writing. Biography, you know, it's something to do with just talking through your life and being able to talk about this thing. So what you're seeing here are quotes, and that entre deux stuff that we decided on was the fact that we are interpreting other people's stories. We are storying other people's stories. And what does that do for us? Because it clearly puts us in the middle somewhere between what they actually said and what you're getting here are snippets. You're getting our culling from their interviews, and clearly that has major implications looking at our positionality and the value systems that we have and the ways in which we drive this. Sometimes the goals are set for me, half and half. I'm okay with that, and I often set my own goals. And I don't imagine where anybody in this seminar, as we're listening now, would disagree with that. Sometimes they're my goals. I set them. Do other people set them for me? I have to say, by the time you get to my stage in life, very few people set goals for me, but I think my head of department would like to do so. But generally speaking, you get the opportunity to set your own goals, and that's part of the stories about how. So, for example, one of our storytellers was had been an accountant, and when the kids had gone and suddenly the house was slightly empty, she said, "It's my turn," and she wanted to become a landscape gardener. And so she attended courses at Kew Gardens, the Royal Horticultural Society, and she became very, very involved in the design and the construction and the plant. So it was a lot of plant biology. There was a lot of things going on in there. So she set her own goals entirely. Okay, some of them were set for her during the formal courses she attended, but in general, she set her own goals about how she wanted to do that. Here, Samreen, she liked some of the goal setting that was taking place around her, but on the whole, she liked to set her own. It keeps me focused. Amna, I had to compete with them to make sure that I was doing more than what was required of me to keep on getting the training post, and thank God I always got the post. A challenge set by herself to be able to meet her own criteria for success. The flow of knowledge, and this is something that, as I said, looking at families, I really feel is a major point of interest, if that's the right expression. Not only just contributing within formal provision, but sharing of knowledge. I mean, what we call knowledge transfer, knowledge exchange is all about, you know, the flow of knowledge backwards and forwards. And the more I get involved with that at university level, the more I enjoy it, by the way. So, as Amna says, I can't generally concentrate on memory techniques, and I'm with her there, by the way. I never do rote learning like medical terms. I always look at the real life side of things, and I share knowledge, share practices, and I think that's true of most people within the kind of lives and departmental setups that we have, where maybe we don't do it well enough, but nevertheless we do it. A seminar, this is exactly what it's about. A seminar is about sharing knowledge and understanding, and allowing people to contribute to that experiential texture. I do love it. For example, we outsource some of the production tasks, and our management team wanted to just bring that in-house so that we could have more quality control and we could harness the expertise to develop our ideas. She was working within industry, and we were tasked with managing that, bringing some sections of the work that they previously outsourced back in-house. I loved it. It was great fun. And the feeling that you're trusted, the professional trust that's associated with being given a task and going away and doing the task and getting some sort of uplift from that, it was so rewarding, and it was a marker of success for her. For Samri, I don't always read literature books, whereas my husband is quite into reading and encouraged me to read books. I don't think that's a good problem since I enjoy it. I think it's a blessing that I enjoy reading medical stuff outside of my specialism as well. I think, yeah, it's difficult sometimes being a woman, it's difficult to persevere. And I think you have to be strong, although things can affect you. Nevertheless, I feel happy. So a sense of overcoming the challenges, but enjoying the whole process of the experience of reading, the experience of engaging and immersion in what she's doing. Who's evaluating who? Somebody says, I think we're harsher on ourselves than our managers are. And I understand that. I sometimes think, you know, we can be more demanding of ourselves than other people are of us. I mean, I'm speculating here that that's true of other people, not just ourselves. We are always evaluated. People are constantly evaluating us. You know, have you done it? Well, why haven't you done it? Mike, you're behind your deadlines again. But yeah, I'm sure it's true of all of us that we look for markers and we look to see if we can meet those, and then that within any sort of organization, I guess, that sense of evaluation is something that, I mean, you want people to be able to tell you where you fall, but in a way that allows you to accept the way that you fall behind in doing something or whatever. And that creates a tone, a sense of how you measure up to yourself and how you measure up for other people. When I did my first year appraisal, the training program said to me, you've done quite a lot in the first year. And I said, no, I'm not that much. She said, no, you've done these and blah, blah. And it's that sense of I guess in all performance review of having a sense of being able to place yourself inside that within the, are you doing your job properly? Are you doing your job well? Are you measuring up to what's expected of you? And so, and in general, people like to sit in the middle of that and have a fairly comfortable sense of the evaluation that's going on and around them. Now, I don't think those are, I mean, I think they're big things. I don't think they are unique to what we're talking about. I'm sure that would be true in formalized systems like schools, as well as universities, as well as informalized systems outside of that, where you set your own goals and you set your own parameters and you measure your own success. So they're both interestingly vague as well as being nicely, appropriate, it seems to me.
So implications and next steps. We've been talking about implications throughout our presentation, but three main implications. One is the intersectional framework. We didn't only use it as a theory, but we used it as methodology, and we made it our own according to the context. So the intersectional framework should have personalized stories of success and failures, the diffusion with the culture and resistance and movement in the STEM pipeline, not only the movement out, but we need to look into movement inside as well, people going back into the pipeline. We thought that gathering science lives allow us to voice stories of success, to combat negative stereotyping as well, because we keep looking into a literature which talks about South Asian women or Muslim women or people from Bangladesh, for example. They are quite oppressed. But our stories included all these women, and none of them said that they are oppressed at all. Although they were talking about progression, they were talking about success and how they move on in their lives. And the third one, and we want to proceed with these next steps in our upcoming books and articles. And then pedagogy for success rather than of success. Mike has detailed it very much. It's like assessment of success and assessment for success. Mike mentioned it in one of his articles as well. So we are looking into for success rather than of. We are not looking into outcomes. We are not looking into numbers or grades, but a wider informal way. So this is our next step, that we are very much looking into informal learning, pedagogy for success, as well as women coming, or people, not even only women, but men, women, and others, they're coming back into STEM in informal ways. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Saima and Mike.